Hey everybody, it's EJ from Eyedesyn.com, and today we're going to get a little intro to using the shader effector to create some nice cool HUD elements and learn why you should never use the random effector ever again. Let's learn how. Alright, so this is what we're going to be creating along our journey of getting a little introduction to the shader effector and why I think it's the best way to apply random noise generated movements to your clones versus using a random effector. So we're going to do a little bit of hating on the random effector here, unfortunately. But let's just go ahead. Let's create a new scene and we'll just rebuild that whole grid of spheres there. So I got my cloner. I am going to create my sphere. I'm just going to place the sphere underneath that cloner, so it's going to clone that sphere. And then I'll go to my cloner object, change the mode from linear to grid array, and let's just shrink the sphere down to like 0.5, and we'll zoom in here so we can actually see my little tiny spheres here. And then we're just going to adjust the count in X, Y, and Z. So I'll bring up the count in the X to 15, the Y I'll put 6, and then 15 on the Z, and then I'll just shrink down the size in the X, Y, and Z as well. So we got 155 and 150, and we have this nice little grid setup, little grid array setup. So that's looking good. And I'm not going to actually turn on render instances because for a lot of the effects that I'll be applying with my shader effector, having render instances turned on will not allow us to see the effects of the shader effector on each of these clones. So for the shader effector, I'm going to keep the render instances turned off, even though it will slow down my scene a little bit. So we got our sphere grid here, and we'll just go ahead and let's get the random effector out of the way. And just want to highlight why I think it's very limiting and compare it to the options that are in the shader effector. So I'm going to apply the random effector. We have it applied in our effectors menu on our cloner, and you can see that just kind of exploded out all of our clones randomly in X, Y, and Z about 50 centimeters each. And again, random different strengths applied to each cloner. And that's kind of the strength of the random effector there, is just applying random values and affecting clones quickly, easily. And let's just have these affect our clones in the Y direction. And then we can also go to the effector list here, and we have the random modes. We also have this maximum and minimum. So if we actually want, we don't want negative value, so like negative scales or negative position, because again, we have position set to 50 centimeters positive in the positive direction, but we're actually having those negative values. So we're actually getting from positive 50 to negative 50. We actually clamp that by just bringing our minimum and just bringing that to 0. And you can see that we no longer have any clones in our negative Y value or negative Y axis here. So that's pretty handy. But let's just focus on this random mode here. And we only have a few different types of random noise that we can apply to our spheres here. And that's kind of the downfall of the random effector. Number one, this isn't an animated. This type of random mode set to random does not animate. Gaussian, again, is not an animated noise. Noise is a type of animated noise. The random mode set to noise. We can adjust the animation speed here. We can adjust the scale. But those are the only two options we can really affect on that type of noise. So that's a nice animated noise. Turbulence is also another animated random mode of noise for the random effector, but that's basically it. I mean, sorted really doesn't do anything. It's not animated. So you only have these two different types of noises, but we all know that in Cinema 4D, we have a whole bunch of different noise types that we don't have access to using the random effector. So let's just get rid of that. Get out of here, random effector. And I'm going to select the sphere grid cloner again. I'm going to go to Mograph Effector, and we're going to bring in our shader effector here. You're going to notice that our min and max mode is automatically set to a minimum of 0, so we won't have any negative random values unless we want them, and bring that down to negative 100 or something like that. But in the shading here, we can actually load up a noise shader. And what I'll do is just go into my parameters, and right now I only have scale being affected. Let's just bring that up to 3. And then again, just like we had in our random effector, I'll just have some random values being applied to the Y. So we have random values that go up to 50 centimeters of being applied to all of our clones here. And again, this is not animated, but if I go into my shader effector here, go to my shading menu, go into my noise option, we have the very familiar just noise shader. And it comes with all of these options that are not available in the random effector. So this is a huge benefit of using the shader effector versus the random effector, because we can choose not just noise and turbulence. So we got turbulence and we have noise types, but we have all this other type of noises here as well. And you can actually click on this little arrow here to visually see what those look like. So we don't have access to those in using the random effector. So big benefit of using the shader effector is we have access to all these different types of noise. Another thing here is we also have the animation speed. So if I put in an animation speed of 2, you can see that our noise is now animating. If I right click on my noise window, you can actually see the noise animating in our little window here as well. So maybe 1.5 to slow that down a little bit. We can adjust the global scale of that noise as well. Another nice thing, and you actually do this on the random effector as well. Let's just turn off this animate there, is we can go ahead and visually see how the noise is being applied to our clones by going to our shader, going into the parameter here, and making sure use alpha strength is turned off. And what you're going to see is different grayscale values being applied to our clones here. And we can see this a lot more clearly if we go back into our shader tab, the shading tab here, go into our noise and adjust the contrast. So you can see that wherever the black values and the light values are in our noise, it's actually being applied to our clones here as well. So you can see that the darker clones are barely getting affected. They're getting a very low strength of that shader effector being applied to it. And the lighter valued clones are having higher strengths of that shader effector being or affecting and pushing those clones up and also scaling them up. So they're pushing them up 50 centimeters and then they're also scaling them up to 3 times their original size. So we can visually see what's going on. And again, you can do this with the random effector as well, but I always like to see visually what's kind of happening here. Again, we can go from our shader effector, just choose a different type of noise. So we can do Ober and just see what that looks like when that's animated. It's a little bit more sharp of a transition there. We can do cell noise, which is kind of cool. We can also do mod noise, which is more animated here. We can adjust the contrast there as well, so we can get some cool kind of like mechanical looking type of things. And again, these noise types are not available in the random effector there. So that's kind of that's why I'm kind of singing the praises of the shader effector in this tutorial, is because it's got so many other options there. So let's go ahead. And another benefit of using the shader effector here is we can actually layer up shaders. So just like in a normal material, if I just bring the material here, just like we can choose different effects here and apply them to a material, we can do the same thing to our shader effector here. And what I'll do to be able to layer up and stack up different effects, I'm going to use a layer shader. And what that's going to allow us to do, if I just click on the layer shader here, it placed our noise inside of layer shader, and that allows us to then apply different types of effects. So we can layer up different types of noise on top of one another. But what I actually want to do is apply a gradient so the the clones on the bottom don't have a lot of strength of the shader effector being applied to the bottom, and so they can kind of stay put. Right now they're all kind of moving up. Like, let's first just go back to just normal noise here. And then what I'm going to do is go back into my layer shader, go to shader, and just grab a gradient. And then what that's going to do, again, this is a layer shader that works exactly like Photoshop. So we have one layer stacked on top of the other. We also have the blending modes here too. So right now our gradient's just blowing out the noise that's underneath it. And we can see that it's actually applying the strength of the shader gradient at a horizontal gradient. So again, you can see that our darker clones here are not being affected at all, and then slowly ramps up to the lighter grayscale values all the way to the white, where our full shader effector strength is being applied. So these have 0 scale, like a scale of 1, and it's at Y0 position, and these have a scale of 3 times that, and then it's moved up 50 centimeters in the Y. So you can see how that works. But what we can do, instead of having this gradient applied horizontally, we can apply this vertically using the 2dV. And what that will do is then allow us to constrain and limit the shader effector from being applied to this bottom row of clones there. So you can see that those clones are not being affected at all, and then the top clones are being affected nicely. So they're getting the full strength of that shader. And what we can do is go back into our layer shader, and right now our gradient's just blowing out the noise underneath it. But if we choose a multiply blending mode, you can see that with the combination of the gradient and the noise, and let's just hit play here, we now have constrained the random movements from our shader effector to just the topmost rows of clones there, which is really cool. So you have a lot more control over that. And again, we can adjust the clones or the gradient here, and that will then affect how many of those clones are being affected. So you can see now like the bottom 4 rows of clones are not moving at all, but the ones on the top are. And we can then even adjust this even more. So our bottom row is staying put, but then all the other rows of clones are happily dancing around. There we go. Again, just the power of using the shader effector and being able to really have full control over how a gradient's applied, or how noise is applied, different types of noise. A lot of really cool stuff you can do here. One other thing that's really, really cool is we can actually use those grayscale values that are being applied by the shader and actually use it to drive colors of our clones. So right now they're just shaded grayscale, and that doesn't look too interesting, right? So what we can do is I'm just going to create this material. I'm just going to name this color shader. And basically what the color shader does, you can load it in anywhere on your material. And I'm going to load it up in the luminance because I just want to have like a flatter kind of UI HUD effect kind of thing. So there we go. We just applied just white luminance to our cloner there. But what I want to do is use that grayscale shader information and use it to color the luminance of this material. So I can do this very easily by going to my texture menu here, going to Mograph Color Shader, and what you're going to notice is that is now applying those grayscale values that are coming from my shader effector, and it's applying them to my clones through the luminance channel. So we have these flat grayscale values being applied there. But what if we don't want those grayscale values? What if we want to change them to different colors? Well, we can do that as well very simply by going to Colorizer, and basically Colorizer is the Cinema 4D version of After Effects Colorama, where if we apply that, it basically uses a gradient and remaps those grayscale values to these colors. So now we have this really cool black to red to yellow gradient being applied to my clones. And I just recently discovered that this default gradient is actually the colors of the German flag. So a little useless Jeopardy knowledge there for you, because Maxon creates Cinema 4D, Maxon's in Germany. Nice little Easter egg from the Germans over there. So that's the gradient that we have applied. We can actually go in here, change this to like a light blue, move the color chip there, and then have like a darker blue over here, something like that. You can see that we just remapped those grayscale values to these different types of blue here, which is really, really cool. Looking good. And again, we can adjust how these are being mapped vertically by just moving our color chip. So you can see that more of that darker blue is being applied to our clones here. So everything's looking really, really good. And again, this is all animated. And the final thing that I think is really, really cool about using the shader effector, and one of the really handy uses is, again, we have access to all the options in our noise shader here. One of those being the loop period. So we can actually create looping noise super, super easy. So how the loop period works is it's based off of how many seconds your animation is, or how many seconds you want the noise to animate before it actually loops. So some people might think that, oh, maybe it's by frames, so my animation is 90 frames, but actually no, it's actually by seconds. So instead of 90 frames, we actually have our animation is 90 frames long, it's 30 frames a second, so our animation is actually 3 seconds long. So if I have this play out, you'll see that we actually now have a seamless looped noise by using that loop period there. So super, super useful. Again, I just want to reiterate that the Random Effector has no way of looping noise whatsoever. So if you need looping noise, if you're working on cool animated GIFs that you want to loop, Shader Effector is the way to go, because we can then loop any type of noise that's in our noise shader here. So really, really cool, really awesome. Again, you can adjust the contrast and all that good stuff as well. Adjust the size. Get some really, really cool looks there. So one last thing I want to share about the shader effector, because we're really only scratching the surface of what the shader effector can do. So what I'm going to do is just go ahead and delete this layer shader here. And instead of using custom shader, I'm going to use something completely different. And the one thing I'm going to do, I'm just going to delete that material as well. And what I'm going to do is go ahead and we're going to use an image to actually drive an effect clone. So I have just my, I'm just going to load this in the Luminance channel. I have a little image of my Eyedesyn logo here. You can see that. We have, it's just white and this light teal. And I'm going to apply that to my shader effector. Now what I can do is use the Luminance channel, because that's the actual channel of my material that I applied that image to, and I can use that to manipulate the clones on my cloner here. So go to my shader effector. Instead of custom shader like we used before, we want to say use the Luminance channel of a texture. And then we just define the texture tag we want to use, and that'll be this one that we just applied. You're going to notice that it's not looking correct because we have this applied with UVW mapping. Now, the mapping that you'll want to use for clones here is just flat. And what we'll do is figure out what's going on here. So what I will do is I've got my shader effector selected. I got my material tag selected. I'm going to go into texture mode, and you'll see that brings up a grid. And you can see that it's actually facing the wrong direction. We actually need this to lay flat. So what I'll do is with the texture mode enabled, I can just hit R to bring up the rotation bands and just constrain this by holding the shift key down to increments of 10 and just have that lay down flat there. And then what I'll do is enable the axis modification tool and hit T, and I can scale this down. You can see that's actually a little bit bigger than I want it to be. And the importance of having that enable axis modification tool on is if I turn that off and I try to scale down, it's not going to scale proportionally. So that's kind of the key there. I'm just going to undo that. If I have enable axis modification on, I can scale that proportionally. All right, so right now I think we need to add more clones so we can actually see and make out our logo. So I'll go out of my axis modification mode, go back to model mode here, and I'll just adjust my sphere grid here. So let's just add more clones. Let's do 50 by 50. And now you can see that actually our logo's there, but we actually have it tiled, so I'll just turn that off. And we can actually probably want to go ahead and scale this up again. So I'll go back on my texture tag, go back into my texture mode, and go and enable modification there, and just do that. And I think once we scale that up enough, we can actually turn tiling back on because it won't. It's only an issue of tiling when we scale this super low. But there we go. I think we're good there. And you'll notice that all of the clones that have this lighter color from that image applied to it is pushed up in having the full strength of that shader effector applied to it. And then the blue values, which are more along the middle gray value, is kind of being like it's in a middle value here. And the reason for that is that the shader effector is actually pulling the grayscale information from that image to then affect those clones. So we can go and maybe just bring this down a little bit. Maybe we don't even want position. Maybe we want to actually scale down the clones that are the lighter value. And what I'll do is I'll just increase the scale of my actual sphere here. You can see that we have this cool like dot matrixy kind of effect here. Let's get radius of 3 should work. There we go. And then we can render that out. And you can see that we can now kind of make out our logo here. But those clones are now scaled down from our shader effect because it's using those grayscale values to then affect those lighter clones more than the blue clones there. So what we can now do is you can see that if I zoom in here, we have some specular happening there. What if we just want to apply that flat luminance material to this, all these clones here as well? Well, what we can do is again use the color shader. So what I'll do is go ahead, apply this new material to my clone grid, go to luminance, turn that on. Again, we're going to use the color shader. And since our shader effector is using and outputting the colors from that image, it's now applying those colors through the luminance channel of this new material that we created. So this color, this logo shader, basically. And there we go. So we got some nice effects using an image to apply colors and shrink and affect the clones from our cloner using the shader effector as well. So let's actually just go back to our original file here. And we'll just do some finishing touches with our little cool UI HUD grid sphere-y thingy going on here. So let's go ahead. Let's add our camera. And I'll just look through it by clicking the little viewport and then change the focal length to like 35 and the sensor size to 50. So we got a little bit of some lens distortion there. And then what I'm going to do is I want to have some depth of field. So what I'll do is I'll change this to physical renderer, which will allow us to enable depth of field through our camera. So the first thing I need to do is actually choose my focal point. So I need to just bring in the focal point of my camera a little bit closer to the grid here. Something like that. And then I'll just say, we'll just render that and see what this looks like. And you can see that really no depth of field blur is really happening at this point. And that's because we have to bring down our f-stop just like an actual real life camera. If we bring that to like f1, you can see a little bit of blurring. We can even make this a little bit lower, say like 0.5. We can really start to see the blur. And I think that's a pretty cool effect there. So what we can do as well is maybe add a little bit more lens distortion. So we can add some quadratic lens distortion by bringing that to like 50%. And you can see that that kind of warps our image a little bit. We can even go like a negative value, so like -50, so it kind of warps it towards us, which is kind of cool, but I'll just leave that at +50. And we can then add like some chromatic aberration, so we have some like blurring, like some distortion of our RGB fields here, which adds this really, really cool effect. Let's go ahead and let's just add some glow on top of this as well. So I'm just going to go add some glow. And I'll just bring up the intensity of that, so maybe say 50. See what that looks like. That's probably a little bit too much. Let's bring the size down to 2. That's looking a little bit better. There we go. I think that's looking pretty cool. So you can see that we actually have some grain that is happening along our depth of field there. So if we go to our physical settings and just increase the sampling to say medium, that should help out and try to smooth out that depth of field action there. I think I prefer just a little bit of grain, some like film grain from our depth of field there. I think it adds a really cool aesthetic to this render here. So that's basically how I applied and made this cool little HUD element here. So hopefully through this tutorial you understand the benefits of using the shader effector versus the random effector, and hopefully this will just allow you to just basically never use the random effector ever again. I don't see why you would, unless you just are super lazy and just want to apply some random stuff to it without much control at all. But the shader effector just has so much more to give versus the random effector. So hopefully this opens your eyes to the shader effector and has you using this in your projects in the future. All right, so there's your little intro to using the shader effector and why, if you've been using the random effector, it's almost like you've been like driving a car stuck in first gear the whole entire time. And that shader effector is just so much more versatile, so much more powerful than the random effector. Hopefully you'll be using the shader effector in your workflow from here on out. So if you have any questions about the shader effector, be sure to leave them in the comments section. If you make anything cool using the shader effector, I'd love to see it. Show me on Facebook, Instagram, on Twitter. Love to see what you guys are making out there. And if you like this tutorial, be sure to hit the like button. I'd appreciate that. And I appreciate all of you out there watching this tutorial. I'll see you all in the next one. Bye, everybody.